So hello everyone, buenas tardes. Like Thomas pointed out earlier, I have the same comment to make. It's actually wonderful to see that Conceal made it possible to organize one workshop or one meeting, especially focusing on andrology, because I'm completely with you that andrology is completely underestimated, although it's one side of the medal. So I'm Thomas Ebner from Austria, and I'd like to thank Juan Carlos and his team to give me the chance to be part of this very interesting meeting. And since this is a very general topic that you see here, media and andrology, actually I had the problem to find a red line through my talk. But by including also some basic science, I hope that it'll be okay for you and that you get some information on it. And since this is a scientific meeting that is sponsored by industry, I have to give you my conflicts of interests, none of which is of importance, I would say, related to this talk, but the one highlighted here, Gynamed, definitely is one that is of importance, because Conceal is the distributor of not all, but maybe of most of the Gynamed products here in Spain, meaning that since I'm a scientific consultant of Gynamed, more for the ionophore thing, less for andrology, but nevertheless there is some relation and you should know that. This brings me to this slide, because this is something that I criticized in the past. I went to the company, I approached the company and told them, it's so complicated. Every other month they come up with a new medium, and for the customers like we are, and we use it in the daily routine, definitely it's hard to get an information what to which, what for. So we're going to talk today on the andrology part of this culture series, culture media series, and this is not even the most actual one, because they also came up with some bromelain, as we heard earlier, for liquefaction, for improving liquefaction of the ejaculate. It's recommended by the WHO also in the last version. So I'd like to start with a very general slide. You may call it a summarizing slide, which shows that actually the sperm, as I pointed out earlier, is half of the success. But it should also highlight that both of those gametes, the female one as well as the male one, have to undergo a cascade of processes that makes it fit for fertilization and oocyte activation. So in terms of the oocyte, this is the nuclear maturation as well as the cytoplasmic maturation, and both of these processes have to happen in a synchronized way, so that then an optimal oocyte is waiting for an optimal sperm. And after all those steps like capacitation, achieving hypermotility, acrosome reaction, chemotaxis, for example, then the sperm actually is also the best quality sperm in vivo, I would say. And then definitely the whole interaction can start, like cumulus complex penetration, passage of the zona pellucida via the zona protein 3 receptor, the passage of the peravitreal space. Then it comes to the sperm-oocyte fusion via the two proteins, Juno from the oocyte and the Sumo1 from the sperm, leading to oocyte activation, and finally the decondensation of the sperm head, the PN formation, and then the oocyte is activated and fertilized, as we say. So definitely the sperm is of importance. On the other hand, we know that the sperm is particularly vulnerable to damage from either inside or outside sources, exogenous sources. And this is due to the fact that the sperm has some remodeling of the chromatin within the testes, meaning that the histones are taken out and replaced by protamines, at least up to 85%. And this means during these stages, the DNA is very vulnerable, and strand breaks may be the result of that. And if the sperm carries a strand break after ICSI, it'll come into the oocyte. I'm not sure if it would work via IVF, there is a high rate of strand breaks, but let's consider that a lower rate of strand breaks does also allow fertilization with IVF. Then it comes into the oocyte. The oocyte either may deal with that problem or can't. We'll look on that in a minute. And then it straight goes to the zygote. It's carried over to the zygote and to the embryo. And then in the lab, What we do is stressing the embryos, again, with our culture, with exposing them to visible light, particularly to the blue range of light, also with our micro manipulation techniques, the time outside the incubator. Whatever we do with the gametes, with the embryos, with the sperm, it may cause harm to them. That's definitely the case. So let's look on the potential responses of an oocyte, or a zygote in this case, if it faces DNA damage. If it faces DNA damage, one way could be that apoptotic pathways are activated, which would ultimately cause cell death. On the other hand, this is if the stress is too high, the stress coming from DNA strand breaks. One way would be that the oocyte or the zygote could tolerate the lesions, meaning it tolerates it, it does nothing, no try to rescue it. But this would cause mutations, for example. It can cause mutation. So this is not the proper way to respond, but sometimes it happens. So the proper way that we would expect is that the oocyte or the zygote or the embryo tries to rescue the cell or the cells by repairing the lesions. And then we would expect a normal development. And the potential causes of strand breaks coming from the sperm into the oocyte are highlighted here. So most likely there is no change in fertilization rate. So fertilization, particularly with ICSI, is not a big deal here, but definitely it may delay further cleavage because the cell needs time to correct the DNA strand breaks, meaning that the cleavage is not as it should be. And if you have a time-lapse system, for example, then you can actually measure that. You don't know that this is caused by strand breaks, but it could be. There are other reasons as well. And particularly after the embryonic genome activation, you'll see some influence on blastocyst formation, on pregnancy rates or implantation rates, and also on miscarriages rate. That is commonly accepted, I would say. And another accepted paradigm is that it's actually the oocyte that assumes responsibility for the repair and remodeling of both the paternal and the maternal strand breaks. But the sperm itself has only one DNA repair protein that is highly present. This is OGG1. Nevertheless, there is some hypothesis that it's a collaboration between the paternal and the maternal machinery that actually cures the cells from strand breaks. So let's look a little bit closer on strand breaks. You may argue if there's only a single strand break, not much of a problem, because easily the oocyte should be able to deal with this problem. The problem is, the longer you wait, or the longer the oocyte waits with repairing the single-strand DNA break, the higher is the risk that it gets towards replication. And once the DNA is replicated, automatically there will be a double-strand break at the end. So a single-strand break can be a double-strand break after the next S phase. And this is something you should keep in mind. The repair process of a single-strand break is less prone to failures because it's easy for the cell to use the second strand as a template. So it just does it the opposite, using those enzymes that I've shown here, like endonucleases, DNA polymerases, and ligases to seal the strand then again. And there are several ways to do so. Either you only cut out one base, you could cut out one nucleotide. Actually, nucleotide excision repair refers to 12 to 24 approximately nucleotides that are removed of this DNA backbone and then replaced by the modified new version. So this is the easy form of strand breaks. More complicated it becomes with double strand breaks, because here you see that it's at first glance pretty complicated, but if you know that there are only two methods, actually three, but two common methods to repair double strand breaks. It's on one side the homologous recombination, on the other one is just the opposite, the non-homologous end joining. And there are certain differences, and I try to show it here. In the first hand, the HR, the homologous recombination, needs a single strand DNA, and that has to be done by the cell itself. Next to the double break, there is a single strand that is created, and then this has to invade the sister chromatid. Sister chromatid means that actually this can only happen in late S phase and in G2 phase. So this mechanism is not available during the whole cell cycle, only after S phase. And this you can see highlighted here. So this is very late. But on the other hand, the non-homologic one is cell cycle independent. But since this is cell cycle independent, it has no template at all. And this is the problem. It's very prone to failures. So the non-homologous end joining is a little bit more prone to failures, and it may cause mutations or things like that. The positive thing is, whenever it happens, it can act. This is the good thing, I would say. Yeah, I think this is enough said here. So let's consider that we do create strand breaks on purpose. And this has been done by these authors. They actually caused, in a mouse model, strand breaks. They had a control, which was the untreated group, and then they did some radiation on the sperms, either using 1 gray, and the more extreme form, they used 30 gray. And you see here, they did come up with more or less stable damage of the DNA up to 60% if they used 30. And what came out at the end, it is like no, as we hypothesized before, no influence on fertilization, but there was an influence on blastocyst formation rate in a female age-dependent way. In other words, the older the oocyte is, the patient, let's consider, could be in vivo aging, could be in vitro aging. So if the quality of the oocyte is not perfect, if it's too old in a way, then definitely it has a negative influence on the machinery that can repair DNA strand breaks. And if you use sperms, and this is a time-lapse study from Slovenia, these colleagues used IMSI selected sperms by different classes. So class 4 is the worst quality sperm, class 1 is the best quality sperm, and you see here in those fertilized eggs that made it up to blastocyst stage, it was clear that there was up to an 8-hour difference up to 4-cell stage, meaning 8 hours delay. This theoretically could be based on the fact that the strand breaks have to be corrected. The strand breaks that obviously came in via the class 4 sperms. And this is the last slide on strand breaks. To just highlight that the mean DFA might have an influence on live birth rate. That's what you can see on the left side. And if you have a prepared sperm, if you process the sperm, actually you still have the same association, but at a lower level, meaning whatever we do with the semen improves the quality. So we accumulate definitely sperm with a lower rate of DNA damage when we do our methods. So what I tried to say with the last slides is that we actually really have to do a very proper sperm diagnosis on one hand, with whatever has mentioned today, looking on the spermiogram, and here again a conflict of interest because I listed here those products of Gynemed, allowing to check the viability, immunology, and things like that. But you have a population of sperms, the gray ones are the bad ones, and by sperm processing you reduce the number of bad ones, but you still have them. So what we do then on top is to do some sort of sperm selection, you'll see in one of the next slides. And if the quality is okay, then we do some sperm freezing on top of that to use it later on. Sperm processing itself is obviously performed in order to remove the seminal plasma, and this is also something to do with the pH. To remove leukocytes, debris, bacteria, viruses, erythrocytes, to allow capacitation, but at the end to accumulate better quality sperms, as I said a minute ago. So the methods that we can use is either a swim-up technique, a mini swim-up technique, density gradient centrifugation, selection chambers, MAX, electrophoresis, microfluidics. So we didn't even talk on microfluidics today, because this could also, I know there is some effort trying to make microfluidics more commercial, I would say. So maybe in the future we'll see a little bit of that. And here we have the selection methods that I was talking that are done after you process the sperms. So you could use polarization microscopy to identify those sperms with highly organized midpiece. You could use PIXI, you could do IMSI, just to get a better idea about the morphology itself, but you could also go to reduce those sperms with strand breaks. And the problem with all those methods, particularly with the last one, is you analyze a subpopulation of sperms and you say, okay, we have 20% sperm breaks. After processing the sperm, we have 8% sperm breaks, and then you inject one oocyte and you don't know whether this is one with or without sperm break. And this is the problem with all those methods. But what is good is that at the end, and this is shown by Markus Mesegier's work here, that a simple swim up does reduce the amount of strand breaks with fresh and with thawed or frozen thawed sperm. If you look on the revised guidelines for good practice in IVF, you'll see that the swim-up technique and particularly the density gradient are the two methods that are recommended and are generally widely accepted. And for patients diagnosed with blood-borne viruses, definitely it's almost a must, I would say. I didn't understand everything what our colleague just talked on the semen bank, but I guess you don't use infected sperms, rather not. So this is something that we all do automatically, I would say. Yeah, and if you compare the swim-up technique with the density gradient technique, and even the combination of both of them, so the density gradient plus the swim-up gives you the best results as compared to the density gradient alone or to the swim-up alone. So combining methods even further improves the quality of the accumulated sperm. And this is definitely true that a two-phase density gradient or maybe a three-phase or four-phase, I never tried that, but this would be a nice study, I would guess. So for that you would need a basic solution of a density gradient so that you can mix your own phases, so to say. But this gives you even a better results any density gradient would do. But the swim-up after the density gradient sanctification definitely is also of importance, because what you need is a medium to dilute either the density gradient or then to wash the sperm. And this you can either do with a CO2-based or bicarbonate-based medium if you work in a CO-supported incubator, but most of us actually use a heat-based buffer or any of those MOPS trees, you name it, and it's definitely something that you can easily use because the pKa is more or less around the physiological pH of sperms, which is a little bit higher than for oocytes. There was one paper, and I'd like to show you that as well, that actually said that herpes gives you a drawback, so there is a damage to the cells if you use herpes buffer media, but then there was a lot of discussion going on, and then definitely some experts came up with the solution, because this Italian group completely reduced the bicarbonate, and bicarbonate is actually important for a lot of other processes as well, meaning that this study was scientific, not very sound. And definitely today we all accept herpes buffered media. I'd like to show you three, because at the end of this slide I'll come to the optimal concentration of herpes within a medium, and I found three papers in literature showing that 25 millimolar of herpes inhibited the growth of bovine eggs, not of human eggs, of bovine eggs, and a higher concentration actually caused embryo fragmentation. So this means 25 seems to be too high. The optimal concentration here found in literature was 21 millimolar, because this kept the DNA from being damaged. One of my students, he tried to compare media suggested to be used in sperm preparation, and medium A to medium D means bicarbonate buffered, and E and F were herpes buffered. And then they treated it as suggested, and you see over 3 days of not using it, but keeping it in incubator, no drawback. So you could use it even after 3 days. And the same here, if you use Hippe's buffered medium, actually you have a stable pH over 3 days. And the latter two media were the one that we use in-house. And here you see something interesting, because this is the optimal concentration, at least according to literature, being published 10, 15 years back. But for those of us who are a little bit afraid of the concentration or the action of Hippe's, you can actually further reduce it if you will do so. So my take-home message today is more or less, if you see that, a strand break that you have will always be associated with asthenospermia. And the more strand breaks you have, the lower the rate will be. And I guess you won't find one paper in literature stating that slow-moving sperms have no strand breaks. There's always a combination. And the theory behind this, if you have a strand break, either a single strand break or a double strand break in the DNA, then you will automatically also have a strand break in the mitochondrial DNA. And since the mitochondrial DNA is responsible for at least ATP, cyclic adenosine monophosphate production, I would say, definitely the cause would be less ATP, less CAM, which means less motility. So this is at least the hypothesis behind that. And this brings me to the importance of motility, because we do have motile sperms, and at the end of this part, and this is now almost coming to the end, meaning we have done more than half of the presentation yet, it's like what to do in cases where you don't have motility. So in the testis itself, spermatozoa are virtually immotile. Then they come to the epididymis, and there the viscosity is also pretty high, meaning that they're still almost not motile. Although, if we have a testicular sample, we do see motility, of course. But in general, it's a reduction in motility. And upon ejaculation, the pH is a little bit more alkalic, and then the sperms become motile. And researchers all over the world were actually looking for the key molecule that drives the start of motility achievement. And they had the idea it could be calcium, it could be hydrogen protons, H+. But at the end, it turned out that it's a simple molecule like cyclic adenosine monophosphate, which activates the protein kinase A, and I'll show you that later in an illustration. And this, in turn, then acts on the adenine, for example. Calcium itself is not important for the start of motility, but to keeping it up, to keep it motile. It definitely needs calcium. And the channels that are used here is the Kepler channel, which mediates the calcium influx and keeps motility stable over a longer period of time. And indeed, you see here in this paper that if you have an ejaculate, there's a difference. Some sperms may have a very good calcium or cat sperm expression, others don't. And then again, it depends which sperm you use for ICSI. And the expression holds also true for processed sperm, so after swimmer in this example. So the Kepler channels definitely are of importance. So if you have phase sperms with a very poor motility, then you will use obviously the one that actually is at least twitching a little bit, particularly in the case of TC material. Theoretically, in previous times, sperm were heated to activate it, to stress it, and via the heat proteins, there is some response of the cell, that the first response is to improve motility. But this is obviously not the way to go. You could also apply physiological stimuli like follicular fluid, cumulus cells, whatever is in vivo, what is natural, should increase, or whatever has contact with progesterone, I should say, might increase the stimuli, and then the motility in turn. But what we do nowadays is actually to do any type of physiological and pharmacological approach. Well, actually, this was an error. Physiological and pharmacological does not go together, of course. So, pharmacological approach, And here, this is the slide that I was referring to. The key enzyme is the membrane-bound adenylyl cyclase, because this is the enzyme that converts ATP to the key molecule cyclic adenosine monophosphate. So this is a major metabolic step. But then, if you do nothing, then the CAM actually goes to AMP. It's converted by phosphodiesterases. So two enzymes, one is the adenylyl cyclase, the other one is the phosphodiesterase. What you could do then, if you want to stimulate means you have to bring up CAM. And you can bring up CAM by two ways. One way would be to stimulate the activity of adenylyl cyclase. So it gives you automatically more conversion from ATP to CAM. And the other one, which is the more common one, because it's easier, you can use PDE inhibitors. So you inhibit this enzyme, and if it's not, so AMP won't be present then, and this enriches within the cell. And this is the way actually nowadays we're working in the lab. So PDEs are unique intracellular hydrolases of CAM. There are 11 families, and those PDE inhibitors can either be selective or more general. So selective is, for example, the PDE5, which is Viagra's sildenafil. So it particularly is very selective, only to its receptors it goes. But in the lab, we use more general PDE inhibitors, such as pentoxifylline, theophylline, and caffeine, because they can actually inhibit more than one PDE. Yeah, the rest is not that important, I would say, but I'd like to draw your attention to this very interesting paper from a Scottish group, Tardif and co-workers, because what they did is they tested 43 compounds. I only mentioned theophylline, pentoxifylline, and coffeine, but they measured 43 compounds and tried PDE inhibitors, I have to say. So I was very proud that I know 3 of them, but they had 43, and by far they're not all. So what they did is they made a density gradient, and they took the worst sperm that stayed in the in-between phase, so not the accumulated selected one. They took the poor quality sperms, they poured it from different poor quality patients, and then they had the worst quality sperms they could get in terms of motility. And then they applied 43 compounds at different concentrations. And then they measured motility and a lot of other things as well. Just to give you the idea, so 100 micromolar was the concentration that I've chosen. So it was a doses response thing. And they identified 6 compounds that actually performed best. And these are the compounds. So no use in IVF. Some of them are medication, hard medication. The least I do know, but just to give you a clear statement that pentoxifylline and theophylline were not amongst the top 10, which does not mean that you shouldn't use it in your lab, but it means that there would be better choices, but they are not available, at least in the IVF lab. Yeah, this one I can skip because they did a high throughput screening, and actually you looked on 17,000 compounds that identified 105, and you see protein kinase, we already talked on phosphodiesterase inhibitors, but also other unknown compounds that did improve motility. And this group they now use to work on male contraception, which is also interesting, just the opposite. It all started with pentoxifylline, and when I started my work in IVF back in 1990-something, then we actually used hard medication, and we destroyed the tablets, and we used this then to stimulate motility, because there was some pentoxifylline in it, obviously. I've chosen 2 studies just to show you that there's a high difference in the concentration of pentoxifylline that has been used in the past. But the babies were healthy, at least in the 2 studies and also in other studies. So why then should one use theophylline? Since pentoxifylline seems to work and is actually a better solubility as compared to theophylline. And the thing is that theophylline has a much longer half-life time. So you can pre-warm it and it will have later on the same effect. This is something you have to test, but I think at least one hour is no problem, but it also works with 2 or 3 hours. But the optimal action definitely is up to 1 hour, I would say. And the other thing is that higher dosages of pentoxifylline, above 1 millimolar, actually decreased blastocyst formation and induced acrosome reactions, so precautious maturation of the sperm, for example. And this is something we don't want to have. And I only found one paper, it was a poster at ESHRE, comparing pentoxifylline versus theophylline. And what they found is actually that theophylline was more healthy, but based on the small number, it's not of importance. You will never make it to a peer-reviewed paper, for example. But just to give you an idea, it's at least as potential as pentoxifylline, and it's obviously available as a ready-to-use thing. So it's also CE marked, but as we know from some countries, it's a DVD CE mark, which is not the same than class 2 product. So for the UK, for example, for the HFEA, they have to apply for every single case once they use it. And so the more data they get, the more easy it is to use it. And they are still using it. I think in France it's also quite complicated, and also in the northern of Italy, but in German-speaking countries, it's no problem at all. It's better to use a DVE CE certified product than to mix it your own. That's definitely for sure. And just for those of you who are interested how to use it, it's very simple. You pre-warm the ready-to-use product. You transfer a small volume into a drop containing your TC material, for example. And this differs a little bit from the manual you would get with the product, because we actually only use, we dilute it by 1 to 10, although it's considered to be a ready-to-use product, just to keep it longer active, and we have pretty good results with that. So within minutes, few minutes, it'll work. This is a TC material, obviously, where we just put in 1 drop. It has no motility at all at the beginning, and then this sperm, although being an immature one, definitely, and then we come with the pipette and take it. So we did this in a study together with German colleagues, and we did find, using theophylline, we did find, you see the higher clinical pregnancy, a higher live birth rate, you name it, and it was better. But of course, the product itself, theophylline, does not give you a higher pregnancy rate. The only benefit was you can do TC material. You can do ICSI with TC material much faster, in less than half of the time, because you don't have to look for those sperms that do like this, twitch a little bit, and then you either motile, or maybe this is a brown molecular movement, you never know. With any type of PDE inhibitor, it will start to swim, or at least it will do like that, if it's an on-site movement. So this is something that makes it more easy, more practicable, and it saves time. Saving time means that you stress the oocyte less, for example. Another study from Germany, and they also did conclude that it's safe. So 37 healthy babies so far, I think, published in literature, 80 to 90 healthy babies, not a single malformation with theophylline product. And we also used it in a case report. This brings me to the summarization, where to use it at all. Obviously, it makes no sense if the 9+2 microtubule structure of the sperm tail is affected. If there is either a mutation in one of those proteins, or any primary ciliary dyskinesia, or Cartagena syndrome, which is PCD plus acetous inversus, or any other defect of the sperm flagellum. If this is affected, you can bring in 1 liter of theophylline and you won't get any response. So the main indication definitely is the frozen thawed sperm. If you have poor motility after warming, retrograde ejaculation, because due to the acidic pH, very often the sperms are not motile or not perfectly motile, in absolute astenosospermia, and most likely, and we do it actually in every cryothese, even if it's an obstructive thing, meaning that there was a vasectomy, and you would expect normal movement, we still use theophylline just to improve the whole process. Not saying that this is the correct way, but we did ask, we have ethical votum at least, to do so. And speaking of tease material, I'd like to show you this slide, because here, highlighted in bold, it says there's actually the absence of viable spermatozoa within a tease material can also be the result of a suboptimal tissue processing, meaning there would be motile sperms, but due to the not perfect processing or mincing of the probe, of the tease sample, you can't extract the motile sperms. So in azoospermic patients, you have several methods. One is the mechanical mincing, and the other one is the enzymatic digestion. And the automatic enzymatic digestion definitely has something to do. Collagenase, it's in the name, and dilutes tissue collagen. But there are certain types of collagenase, and this is of importance, as you will see in the next slide. But you measure exposure time, you measure enzymatic activity, and this is what the colleagues here did in Belgium, and they identified collagenase 4 as being the best collagenase, as compared, for example, to type 1A collagenase, that actually also worked quite well, but at the end had a negative effect on motility, and it took too long. So for practical reason, it was collagenase 4 that has been suggested, because it has a particular effect on the intermediate tissue to dissolve it. So I try to illustrate it here. So you have mechanical mincing, you get a sample, and this is only seminal tubular, you see. So some of us, and I have seen that, they get really a 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter tissue that you then have to mince, and this is quite complicated. And this one looks quite nice. And then you do mechanical mincing, and then you could do collagenase 4 application, and this is something that these colleagues did, and you see by combining two methods again, the outcome was better. So in those cases, and this is a non-obstructive azoospermia, so the worst cases that we can have in the lab, actually 1/3 of them had sperms after they failed to identify them before, without this complex procedure. And again, please have in mind my conflict of interests, but this is a ready-to-use collagenase that is available, and it's very easy. All you do is you pre-warm it, you add it for 1 hour. Actually, we did it 2 hours. Every 20 minutes, you stir a little bit so that there is a homogenization of the tissue, and then you try to get rid of the tissue itself, and you accumulate the liquid containing the sperms that came from the tissue. And this colleague of mine from Vienna, she actually did combine. If you look here, she had tease material, more than 100 cases, no spermatozoa were found in this group, so let's focus on the tease that they did. So they did enzymatic digestion for 2 hours, and then, and this is quite interesting, they made a density gradient centrifugation with the digested tissue that had been affected by collagenase 4. So this is something that we never did, but they do a density gradient centrifugation, and then if they found sperm, they frozen it, and then they had motile spermatozoa in the vast majority of cases, but in 28 cases, there were, referring to 27%, and there were only immotile sperms after this procedure. And then they applied theophylline, and in 85 out of 100, then they had motile sperms at the end. So this was a quite complex combination of several methods, but at the end, it worked quite well, and you see all the babies born were healthy as well. So, because the reason why I highlight all the time that the babies were healthy is when we published our paper, the reviewer said, if I didn't read the papers from 1980, 1975, clearly stating that theophylline or pentoxifylline together with oocytes or embryos causes embryo arrest, for example. But if you go back to these papers, it said 2 days of culture in theophylline. So this is way too brutal, I would say. We would never do that. We're speaking of 1 minute, maybe 5 minutes contact. So the recommendation is oocyte and theophylline or pentoxifylline should not have contact. That's all you should know. So never bring theophylline or pentoxifylline to your oocytes. So this is, I think, the last slide. So the cases of reduced or no sperm motility are a particular challenge in IVF or ICSI. And to distinguish between immotile and non-viable sperms is crucial in our hands. And the pharmacological stimulation of immotile spermatozoa should replace less effective alternative methods, or could replace such as mechanical touching technique, hyposmotic swelling tests, laser pulses. So there are certain ways to identify viable cells, even in case that they don't move at all. But one thing is for sure, if with the theophylline product, and we tried it very often, if there is no response, no motility after this application, then the outcome of the thesis sample is, not of the thesis sample, of the fertilization is very, very poor and hardly ends up in embryo transfer, I would say. Possible indications for theophylline usage are cases of severe azoospermia, cryopreserved sperms, retrograde ejaculation, fresh frozen testicle samples. And particularly in cases of non-obstructive azoospermia, sperms are limited and often trapped in the surrounding tissue. And if there are sperms available, enzymatic digestion may give some value to the clinical embryologist. And if you do so, it rather should be type 4 collagenase as compared to collagenase 1A. So thank you very much for your kind attention. I'm ready to take questions. I'm not sure I can answer them, but I do my best.